My name is Sloane. I am 29 years old, and exactly 2 weeks before my 30th birthday, my sister stood in a cold, wood-paneled Boston courtroom and tried to convince a judge that I was too mentally unstable to control my own money. She spoke softly, pitching her voice to sound like a terrified, exhausted older sister who had spent years trying to save me from my own broken mind. She told the court that I could not hold a steady job, that I suffered from severe paranoid delusions, and that handing me an $8.5 million trust fund would essentially be signing my death warrant. My mother, Marin, sat right beside her at the petitioner table. Every time my sister told another lie, my mother would press a tissue to her eyes, weep softly, and nod along. I sat across the aisle, staring at the women who were supposed to be my family. I did not scream. I did not interrupt them. I did not even flinch when their high-priced attorney, Theron, adjusted his silk tie and delivered a line that felt like a physical blow to my chest. He looked at the judge with a grave expression and said, "Your Honor, Sloane is a danger to herself. She lives in a paranoid fantasy, and giving her this wealth would be handing a loaded weapon to a child." That was the quote. That was the moment my heart turned to ash. They were not just trying to steal my future. They were trying to erase my dignity. They wanted to strip away my basic human rights. Also, Maeve could get her hands on the money waiting for me. Across the room, Maeve rested her perfectly manicured hand on the folder containing her guardianship petition. She looked at me with the calm, arrogant confidence of someone who already believed the $8.5 million was sitting in her bank account. Before I tell you what the judge did next, drop a comment with your city and the weather there. I want to know how far the story of betrayal and cold, hard justice has reached. To understand the sheer magnitude of what was happening in that courtroom, you have to understand the dynamic that defined my entire existence. Maeve had spent her whole life standing in the spotlight while I was forced into the shadows. Now, she was trying to lock me in the dark forever. But what Maeve did not know was that while she was putting on a Broadway-worthy performance, a thick, sealed envelope had just been placed on the judge's desk. And it contained her utter ruin. The air in the courtroom smelled of lemon polish and old paper. It was a heavy, suffocating scent that made my stomach turn. I remember focusing on the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. Every second that passed was another second my sister spent painting me as a lunatic. Theron continued his opening statement, pacing back and forth across the polished floor. He painted a picture of a tragic younger sibling, someone who had lost her grip on reality after our father passed away. He used words like erratic, delusional, and unfit. He claimed I spent my days isolated in my apartment, staring at screens, inventing enemies out of thin air. He spoke with such conviction that if I did not know the truth, I might have believed him myself. I looked at Maeve. She was wearing a modest navy dress, her usually heavy makeup wiped clean to give her an innocent, weary appearance. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She had always been good at this. She knew exactly how to play the victim, how to twist a narrative so that she emerged as the hero. She kept her hands folded neatly on the table, her posture screaming of reluctant duty. She was here because she had to be, because she loved me so much. That was the story she was selling. And my mother? My mother was her ultimate enabler. Marin fake tears were the finishing touch on their masterpiece of deception. Marin wore a tasteful gray suit, her hair perfectly styled, acting the part of the heartbroken matriarch watching her youngest daughter descend into madness. Whenever Theron paused for dramatic effect, Marin would let out a small, stifled sob. I felt a hot, burning anger rising in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I knew that if I reacted, if I raised my voice, or cried, or showed any sign of the rage boiling inside me, I would only be giving them exactly what they wanted. I would be proving their point. So, I sat still. I breathed evenly. I let them dig their graves deeper with every word they spoke. I kept my face entirely neutral, betraying nothing of the storm raging inside my chest. I glanced over at my attorney, Tamsin. She was flipping through her notes, her face an unreadable mask of professional calm. We had spent weeks preparing for this exact moment. We knew what they were going to say, and we knew exactly how we were going to tear their arguments apart. But the waiting was agonizing. The process of sitting there and listening to your own family assassinate your character is a specific kind of torture I would not wish on anyone. Theron finally finished his opening statement and took his seat, offering Maeve a reassuring nod. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Delphine, peered over her glasses at Maeve. The tension in the room was suffocating. Judge Delphine had a reputation for being thorough and merciless. She did not tolerate nonsense in her courtroom. Maeve offered the judge a fragile, watery smile, practically tasting the victory. She really thought she had won. She thought she had outsmarted everyone, just like she always did. She believed her expensive lawyer and her flawless acting were enough to seal my fate. But as Judge Delphine picked up the sealed envelope that my employer had delivered that morning, I allowed myself a tiny, invisible smile. Maeve was about to learn a very hard lesson about underestimating the invisible child. She thought she controlled the narrative, but she had no idea what was waiting for her in the dark. What was inside that envelope? To make sense of the venom Maeve spat at me in that courtroom, we need to take a walk through the museum of my childhood. Every family has roles, and in ours, the casting was permanent from day one. I was born into a dynamic that left no room for me to be anything other than a background character in my sister grand production. Maeve was the golden child. She was loud, charismatic, and obsessed with appearances. Growing up in the wealthy suburbs of Boston, she thrived on being the center of attention. She was the captain of the cheerleading squad, the prom queen, the girl who never had to ask for anything twice because my mother was always rushing to hand it to her. When she launched a tech startup in Austin right after college, using a massive seed loan from our parents, my mother acted like Maeve had cured a major disease. Marin would frame every local magazine article featuring Maeve visionary leadership and hang them in the hallway of our home. Maeve loved expensive dinners, networking events, and the feeling of being the most important person in every room. And then there was me. I was the invisible daughter. I was the one who quietly did her homework, paid her own way through college with scholarships and part-time jobs, and preferred the company of datasets to cocktail parties. I was practical. While Maeve was out buying designer bags, I was learning how to code and analyze financial systems. I worked remotely from a modest apartment in the city, crunching numbers and tracing digital footprints. Because my work required strict confidentiality, I rarely talked about it. My family assumed I was just doing freelance bookkeeping. Maeve loved to mock me at family dinners. She would swirl her wine glass, look at me with a mixture of pity and disgust, and call me a glorified calculator who hid behind screens because I lacked the charm to survive in the real world. Marin would just laugh softly and tell me not to take it to heart. I never corrected her, because correcting her never changed anything. I learned early on that my voice did not matter in that house. The fragile peace we maintained shattered when our father died suddenly from a massive heart attack. My dad was the only one who truly saw me. He built his supply chain logistics company from the ground up, and he valued hard work over flashy presentations. He used to sit with me in his study, showing me how to read balance sheets and profit margins. He knew I had a mind for details. There was no dramatic final goodbye, just an empty chair at the dining table and a silence that deafened us all. The funeral was a blur of black suits and fake condolences. Maeve spent the entire service networking with our father business associates, handing out her Austin startup business cards while standing next to his casket. Then came the reading of the will. This was the moment the earth shifted beneath our feet. We gathered in the mahogany office of the estate attorney. My father was a brilliant man, and he knew exactly who his daughters were. He left the operating control of the logistics company to Maeve. She was thrilled, her eyes lighting up as she mentally spent the corporate revenue. She sat up straighter, looking at me as if to say, I won. But then the estate attorney turned the page and read the next clause. My father had set up a separate, private trust funded by life insurance and personal investments, valued at exactly $8.5 million. And I was the sole beneficiary. The catch? The funds would remain locked in the trust until my 30th birthday. I was 25 at the time. I still remember the look on Maeve's face when the attorney read that number. Her jaw tightened, the color drained from her cheeks, and her eyes darted to my mother. $8.5 million. It was a staggering amount of money, separate from the business entirely. In a letter attached to the will, my dad explained his reasoning. He wrote that Maeve had already received endless financial support, multiple bailouts for her previous failed ventures, and now a functioning company to run. He wanted me to have the freedom to build my own life, away from anyone's shadow. He wanted me to have the security I had never asked for but always deserved. Maeve was furious. She threw a tantrum right there in the lawyer office, her voice echoing off the walls. She called the arrangement a disgusting insult to her capabilities. She demanded to know why the freelance bookkeeper was getting a fortune while she had to actually work to run the family business. She paced the room, yelling that my father must have not been in his right mind. She tried to challenge the will, hiring an aggressive firm to look into it. But her own lawyers advised against it. Contesting it would mean opening up the books and admitting how much money she had already drained from our parents over the years to fund her lavish lifestyle. It would expose her as a financial parasite. So she backed off. For a few years, we lived in a state of Cold War. I grieved my father in private. I went to therapy to deal with the panic attacks that started after his funeral. The sudden loss, combined with the toxic family environment, left me struggling to breathe some days. But I worked through it. I rebuilt my life, focusing entirely on my career, rising through the ranks of my firm. I thought the money was safe sitting in that trust. I thought the distance between Boston and Austin would protect me. But I underestimated the corrosive power of greed and desperation. For years, she seethed in silence, watching the calendar tick closer to my 30th birthday. When her own shiny world started to crumble, my inheritance suddenly looked like her only life raft. What exactly brought the golden child crawling back from Austin, pretending to care about the sister she always despised? 3 years after our father died, the illusion of Maeve's success finally cracked. Her Austin-based tech startup quietly went under. It was not a glorious exit or a strategic buyout, it was a devastating collapse. She had burned through millions in investor capital, throwing lavish launch parties, hiring celebrity influencers, and renting luxury office spaces while the actual product failed to launch. Facing massive debts and angry investors demanding their money back, she packed up her designer bags, abandoned her lease, and retreated to Boston. She took over as the chief executive officer of our father logistics company, putting out press releases claiming she was expanding her portfolio and returning to her roots. My mother, willfully blind to the massive failure in Texas, threw her a lavish welcome home party. The narrative was spun. Maeve was the triumphant prodigal daughter coming home to save the family legacy. It was shortly after her return that the manipulation began. It started so subtly that I almost missed it. Maeve would call me on a Tuesday evening, her tone dripping with uncharacteristic warmth and concern. She invited me to coffee at a quiet cafe near my apartment. She asked about my day. She asked about my cat. And then, slowly, the conversation shifted. "I worry about you, Sloane," she said one afternoon, stirring her almond milk latte with a silver spoon. "You spend so much time alone in that apartment. Are you still having those panic attacks?" I was caught off guard. I had not had a panic attack in over a year, thanks to intense grief counseling and a solid routine. But because a small, desperate part of me wanted to believe my sister was finally trying to build a real relationship, I answered honestly. I told her that the therapy had helped immensely, but that grief still hit me in waves sometimes, usually around the anniversary of Dad's death. Then my mother joined the campaign. Marin would invite me to Sunday dinner and casually bring up my job. "It cannot be healthy, staring at those numbers all day, looking for problems," she would say, passing the potatoes. "You should get out more. Meet someone." Maeve chimed in smoothly, her eyes full of fake sympathy. "Do you ever feel like you are seeing things that are not there, Sloane? Working in fraud, it must make you so paranoid about everyone. Always assuming people are lying or stealing. I should have seen the trap. I should have realized they were mining for vulnerabilities, looking for cracks in my armor. But I just sighed, exhausted by the constant probing, and admitted that yes, tracing dirty money sometimes made me inherently suspicious of strange financial patterns. It was an occupational hazard. When you spend 10 hours a day looking at how people hide stolen assets, you start to view the world through a lens of skepticism. I did not know that every honest, vulnerable thing I said was being logged, twisted, and weaponized. Maeve started laying the groundwork with our extended family. She would whisper to our aunts and uncles at family gatherings, shaking her head sadly while looking in my direction. She told them I was obsessed with hidden crimes, that I was isolating myself from reality, that my grief had morphed into severe paranoia. She pointed to my quiet lifestyle as proof that I was mentally declining. "Look at her," she would say. "She has all that money waiting for her, and she lives in a tiny apartment, terrified of the world. She needs help." And my mother backed her up every single time. Why? Because Maeve was paying the mortgage on Marin massive, unnecessary mansion using company funds. If Maeve went down, if the truth about her Austin debts came out, Marin country club lifestyle went down with her. Marin chose her comfort over my sanity. The most sickening part was how they disguised their malice as love. They painted a picture of a family desperately trying to save a sick girl. They built a narrative so convincing that even I started to second-guess myself when I found Maeve standing outside my apartment door unannounced one rainy evening. She was banging on the wood, demanding to be let in to check on my living conditions. She claimed she had heard I was hoarding things. When I refused to open the door, telling her to leave me alone, she pulled out her phone and texted our mother, claiming I was exhibiting hostile, antisocial behavior and talking to myself through the door. Every boundary I set was framed as a symptom of my supposed illness. I thought my sister was finally trying to love me. I thought the trauma of losing our father had softened her. I did not realize she was just gathering ammunition for an execution. She was meticulously building a profile of a woman unfit to manage her own life. How far was she actually willing to go to get her hands on that $8.5 million before my 30th birthday? The trap finally snapped shut just 6 weeks before my 30th birthday, the day the trust was scheduled to vest and transfer the $8.5 million into my direct control. My mother called me on a Thursday, sounding frantic and breathless. She begged me to join a family wellness consultation via a secure video call. She claimed it was a mediation session she had arranged to help us communicate better, saying the tension in the family was making her physically ill. Reluctantly, wanting to keep the peace, I logged on at the scheduled time. Waiting on the screen was not a mediator, but a man named Dr. Evander. He introduced himself smoothly, flashing a practiced, expensive smile. His office in the background looked like a luxury hotel suite. The session lasted exactly 45 minutes. Dr. Evander did not ask me a single meaningful question about my daily routine, my ability to pay my bills, my social life, or the fact that I had lived entirely independently, managing my own finances perfectly, for over a decade. Instead, he kept redirecting the conversation to my relationship with Maeve. "Sloane, why do you harbor this intense distrust toward your sister?" he asked, his tone patronizing, leaning into the camera. "Do you often have delusions that she is hiding financial information from you? Do you feel like your family is plotting against you?" I was baffled and defensive. I tried to explain that I did not have delusions. I just did not agree with her business practices and preferred to keep my distance. I told him about the unannounced visits and the boundary pushing. But every time I defended myself, he jotted something down with a deeply concerned look on his face. He interrupted me constantly, twisting my words. When I mentioned my job in fraud analysis, he smiled condescendingly and asked if I ever struggled to separate my work from reality. He was arrogant, dismissive, and clearly had an agenda. When the call ended, I felt dirty and exposed, but I assumed it was just another one of Maeve's pointless power plays to make me feel small. I was horribly wrong. It was the final piece of her puzzle, the medical stamp of approval she needed for her master plan. On a rainy Monday morning at 8:15, exactly 10 minutes before I was scheduled to lead a massive investigative briefing with a major corporate client regarding a multi-million-dollar embezzlement case, there was a heavy, aggressive knock on my door. I opened it to find a process server standing in the hallway, dripping wet. He shoved a thick stack of legal documents into my hands, mumbled that I had been served, and walked away without looking back. I stared at the front page, my brain struggling to process the words. It was a petition filed in the state probate court. Maeve was asking a judge to declare me mentally disabled and appoint her as the sole legal guardian of my estate and person. My blood ran cold as I flipped through the allegations. The document described me as emotionally unstable, unable to hold down a real job, living in squalor, and consumed by dangerous delusions that my family was trying to steal from me. It claimed I lacked the basic cognitive function to manage simple daily tasks, let alone a massive fortune. Attached to the back of the petition was a sworn psychological evaluation signed by Dr. Evander. Based on that single, 45-minute video call, he had formally diagnosed me with persistent delusional disorder. He stated, under penalty of perjury, that granting me access to an $8.5 million inheritance would place me at extreme risk of exploitation, financial ruin, and self-destruction. He recommended immediate intervention. I dropped the papers on the floor. I could not breathe. The walls of my apartment felt like they were closing in. Because of the severe nature of the doctor report, the court had not even waited for a hearing. They had issued a temporary emergency order pending a full trial. My trust fund was frozen. The bank managing the account was legally barred from releasing the money to me when I turned 30. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Maeve had deliberately sent copies of the petition to our gossiping relatives, knowing it would spread like wildfire through our social circles. Even worse, someone, and I still firmly suspect it was Maeve using a burner email, anonymously forwarded the court filing to the compliance department of the corporate client I was supposed to meet that morning. Claiming that an auditor under active investigation for mental incompetence was a massive security risk, the client suspended my contract immediately, pending an internal review. My accounts were temporarily frozen. My professional reputation was bleeding out on the floor. My clients backed away out of fear. In one single morning, Maeve had successfully turned my quiet, stable life into a living nightmare. What do you do when your own blood tries to bury you alive and uses the law as a shovel? The isolation that followed the serving of the petition was the darkest, most terrifying period of my life. I was bleeding money just trying to keep my basic bills paid and the lights on, while my professional reputation hung by a thread. I paced my apartment for days, feeling like a caged animal. Every time my phone rang, my heart hammered violently against my ribs. I stopped sleeping. I started jumping at shadows. Maeve had engineered a situation designed to make me actually look and feel crazy. Then, the ultimate betrayal happened. My mother called. I let it go to voicemail, staring at her contact photo on my screen, my hands shaking. When I finally gathered the courage to listen to the message later that night, the sheer audacity of her words made my stomach churn and bile rise in my throat. Maren was crying, her voice shaking with what sounded like genuine panic. She begged me to just stop fighting the guardianship. "Sloan, please, just let your sister handle the trust for a little while," Maren whispered into the phone, her voice cracking. "Maeve just needs temporary control until the company audit is over. If you do not cooperate, the business could collapse, and the bank will take my house. Once the missing money is replaced, everything will go back to normal, I promise you. Just let her use the trust as collateral. Please, Sloan, just be a good daughter. Save our family." I played the message 3 times. I sat on my living room floor in the dark and listened to my own mother ask me to sacrifice my life. Until that moment, a small, pathetic part of me had wanted to believe my mother was just stupid. I wanted to believe she was being manipulated by Maeve, blinded by love, and did not really understand what the legal guardianship actually meant. I wanted to believe she thought she was protecting me. But that voicemail destroyed the illusion forever. Maren knew exactly what was happening. She knew Maeve was trying to steal my money to cover up massive corporate theft, and she was entirely willing to sacrifice my freedom, my sanity, and my future just to keep her luxury mansion and her country club memberships. She was throwing me to the wolves to save her own skin. That was the moment the sadness died. The grief I had held onto for years evaporated, and in its place, a cold, hyper-rational fury took over. It was a clarity so sharp it almost physically hurt. I did not cry anymore. I picked up my laptop, wiped my eyes, and started searching for the most ruthless, brilliant trust litigation attorney in the state. I did not need a peacemaker. I needed a war general. That search led me to Tamsin. Tamsin was a shark in a tailored suit. She specialized in fiduciary abuse, contested estates, and destroying people who tried to weaponize the probate courts. We met in her downtown office, high above the city, away from the prying eyes of my family. I laid the guardianship petition, Dr. Evander's ridiculous report, and my phone with the voicemail recording on her sleek glass desk. Tamsin listened to the voicemail in silence. She read the petition carefully, her eyes scanning the medical jargon. Then she looked at me with piercing dark eyes. She did not offer me pity, a tissue, or a comforting hug. She offered me reality. "Your sister has built a very compelling, very emotional story," Tamsin said, tapping a silver pen against the desk. A grieving sister who lost her mind and became paranoid. A desperate older sibling trying to protect her from herself. A weeping mother backing up the tragic tale, and a licensed doctor stamping it with medical authority. If we go into that courtroom and you get angry or defensive or emotional, you lose. The judge will look at you and see exactly the crazy person they claim you are. I felt a chill run down my spine. So how do I fight a lie that looks so perfect? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We do not fight their emotions with our emotions," Tamsin replied, a dangerous, thrilling smile spreading across her face. "We crush their story with cold, verifiable facts. We find out exactly why your sister is so desperate for $8.5 million right now, and we expose the rot underneath her perfect facade." She was right. Maeve had built a beautifully emotional house of cards, held together by lies and fake tears. Now it was time for me to light the match and burn it to the ground. But where do you even start looking for a fire when your sister has spent years hiding the smoke? The first major crack in Maeve's meticulously crafted armor came from a ghost from the past, someone she thought she had buried. A few days after I officially retained Tamsin, I received a secure, encrypted email on my personal server. The sender was Declan, the former chief financial officer of my father's logistics company. Declan had worked alongside my dad for almost 2 decades. He was a man of fierce integrity, a quiet numbers guy who knew the business inside and out. And he had vanished from the company just 3 months after Maeve took over as CEO. The official story was that he retired early for health reasons. We arranged to meet at a run-down diner on the outskirts of the city, far from anywhere Maeve or Marin would ever go. Declan looked older, tired, and deeply nervous. He kept looking over his shoulder. Sliding a thick, worn manila folder across the sticky table, he looked at me and said, "Your sister did not fire me because I was bad at my job, Sloan. She fired me because I started asking questions about the bleeding." I opened the folder carefully. Inside were copies of internal company ledgers, bank routing numbers, and executive approval logs. Declan explained that shortly after Maeve took charge, the company started hemorrhaging cash at an alarming rate. She was authorizing massive, unverified payments to 3 separate, obscure consulting firms based out of Austin, Texas. $3.4 million, Declan said grimly, tapping a specific line on a spreadsheet. "That is what is missing from the operational accounts. I asked for the vendor contracts, the deliverables, anything to prove these consultants were actually doing work for us. She refused to provide them. She accused me of insubordination, told me I was stuck in the past, and terminated me the very next day. I kept these logs because I knew, sooner or later, an audit would catch it. I just did not know she would try to use you to cover it up." I stared at the numbers printed on the page. $3.4 million. The exact amount needed to cover the massive debts from her failed tech startup in Austin and maintain her extravagant, fake billionaire lifestyle in Boston. This was not just incompetence or bad management. This was systematic, calculated embezzlement. And this is where my family willful ignorance became my absolute greatest weapon. They called me a freelance bookkeeper. They told everyone I just balanced spreadsheets for small businesses from my couch. They did not know that my actual job title was Senior Forensic Fraud Auditor for a global corporate intelligence firm. My entire career was built on tracking down shell companies, reconstructing destroyed accounting records, and hunting dirty money across international borders for Fortune 500 companies. I did not just look at numbers, I dissected them. I lived and breathed financial deception. I took Declan files back to my apartment, locked the door, and went to work. I did not need to hire a private investigator. I was the investigator. I fired up my secure terminals, bypassing basic search engines, and dove into deep corporate registries, IP routing histories, and digital property records. I mapped the 3 Austin consulting firms Maeve had been paying. It took me less than 4 hours to find the connection. They all shared the exact same registered agent, the same virtual mailbox address, and the same answering service. I traced the corporate officers. They were dummy LLCs, shell companies set up mere weeks before Maeve returned to Boston. I tracked the routing numbers, following the money as it left my father company, washed through the Austin shells, and landed squarely in private accounts connected to Maeve personal assets. The money was paying off a luxury sports car, a massive revolving line of credit, and the exorbitant lease on Marin Mansion. I had the paper trail. It was undeniable. But Tamsin wanted more. She will say it was a series of poorly documented business loans, Tamsin warned over the phone. We need to prove malicious intent regarding your specific trust fund. We need a smoking gun that ties the fraud directly to her attempt to declare you incompetent. So, I turned my attention to the trust amendment document Maeve had submitted to the bank, the document she claimed my father had signed, giving her authority to manage my money in case of my incapacity. With the help of a digital forensics contact from my firm, we extracted the hidden metadata from the electronic file she had submitted. The results were glorious. The digital footprint showed the document was created 96 days after my father's death. The author tag was tied directly to Maeve's old Austin office computer. And the signature? It was a low-resolution scan, lifted directly from a vendor contract my dad had signed 5 years ago, perfectly photoshopped onto the new document. We had her. We had the embezzlement, the forgery, and the disgusting motive. Maeve called me a delusional, unemployed paranoid. She was about to find out exactly what freelance bookkeeping really meant. Hey everyone, if you've read this far and feel your blood boiling along with Sloane's, please leave a comment with the keyword I'm win. This is our secret code, the code of those who never bow down to manipulation. I'll like and reply to every comment containing the keyword I'm win. Thank you so much for following this story. The days leading up to the final guardianship hearing were a blur of caffeine, encrypted files, and relentless preparation. Tamsin and I essentially turned her sleek downtown law office into a war room. The polished mahogany table was covered in stacks of printed bank statements, highlighted corporate registries, and digital forensic reports. We were no longer just building a defense to prove my sanity. We were constructing a meticulously detailed trap designed to obliterate Maeve entirely. We needed weapons that were undeniable, weapons that relied on hard math and digital footprints rather than he said, she said, emotional arguments. Our first piece of heavy artillery was the trust amendment document itself. Maeve had submitted this piece of paper to the bank, claiming our father had signed it just before his death, granting her the authority to manage my $8.5 million inheritance if I ever became incapacitated. It was the linchpin of her entire scheme. Without it, even if she convinced the judge I was unstable, the court would appoint a neutral third-party fiduciary to manage the money, not her. She needed that specific document to get her hands on the cash. But Maeve's arrogance was her ultimate downfall. She assumed that because I was the quiet, invisible sister, I would just accept the document at face value. She did not realize that I spent my days analyzing digital forgeries. My contact at the cybersecurity firm had sent over the full metadata extraction report. The report proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the digital file for the amendment had been created exactly 96 days after our father passed away. Furthermore, the author of the document was logged under a user profile tied to Maeve's old Austin tech company. The signature on the bottom was not written with a pen, it was a low-resolution digital scan, lifted from a 5-year-old vendor contract and pasted into the new document. We had her dead to rights on felony forgery. Our second weapon was the money trail. Declan, the former chief financial officer, had given us the internal approval logs. I had spent 3 sleepless nights mapping the outgoing wire transfers from our family logistics company to the 3 dummy consulting firms registered in Texas. The total amount stolen was exactly $3.4 million. I traced those funds from the dummy corporations straight into accounts held by Maeve. The bank records showed she used the stolen company funds to pay off angry investors from her failed tech startup, settle the lease on Marin Massive Mansion, and even make payments on a luxury sports car. We had the exact dates, the routing numbers, and the IP addresses used to authorize the transfers. But Tamsin was a perfectionist. She wanted the final nail in the coffin. She wanted Dr. Evander. Dr. Evander was the polished, arrogant psychiatrist who had diagnosed me with persistent delusional disorder after a single 45-minute video call. His medical evaluation was the only reason the court had granted the temporary emergency freeze on my trust fund. Tamsin knew that bringing down his credibility was essential. If we proved the doctor was compromised, the entire guardianship petition would collapse instantly. I dove into Dr. Evander's financial history. As a licensed medical professional, his primary practice accounts were relatively clean. But people who accept bribes rarely use their main business accounts. I started looking at secondary LLCs registered under his name or his wife's name. It took me a full day of digging through state tax registries, but I finally found it. He was listed as a silent partner in a wellness consulting firm based out of Delaware. I cross-referenced the Delaware firm with the bank statements from Maeve Dummy Corporations in Austin. There it was. A single wire transfer for exactly $45,000, sent from Maeve Fake Consulting Company to Dr. Evander Delaware LLC. The transfer was initiated just 3 days before my mother begged me to join that family wellness video call. He had not evaluated me. He had been paid $45,000 to write a customized, devastating diagnosis that fit Maeve's legal narrative perfectly. He had sold his medical license and my freedom for a paycheck. Tamsin smiled a sharp, dangerous smile when I handed her the wire transfer confirmation. We had the gun, the bullet, and the fingerprints. All we needed now was for Maeve to walk into the courtroom and pull the trigger herself. Every piece of evidence was placed into a thick manila envelope, sealed with red tape, and marked for the judge's eyes only. We submitted it to the court clerk early that morning, requesting it be reviewed under seal due to the sensitive financial nature of the documents. I remember looking in the mirror in the courthouse bathroom before the hearing began. I was wearing a sharp, tailored black suit. My hair was pulled back tight. I looked nothing like the terrified, paranoid victim Maeve had described in her filings. I looked like exactly what I was, a senior investigator ready to tear someone apart. We return now to the cold, wood-paneled courtroom in Boston. The air was thick with tension as Theron, Maeve's expensive attorney, wrapped up his opening statement. He had painted a tragic, heartbreaking picture of a family doing everything in their power to save a sick, delusional young woman from destroying her own life. Maeve was the star of the show. When Theron called her to the witness stand, she walked with a slow, hesitant step, as if the weight of the world was resting on her shoulders. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, looking directly at the judge with wide, sorrowful eyes. Theron began his questioning gently. "Can you tell the court why we are here today, Maeve?" Maeve let out a shaky breath. She gripped the edges of the witness stand, her knuckles turning white. "We are here because I love my sister," she said, her voice trembling perfectly on the word love. "Since our father passed away, Sloane has deteriorated. She isolates herself. She refuses to engage with reality. She has developed these terrifying delusions that everyone is trying to steal from her. I do not want her money, Your Honor. I have my own career. I just want to make sure she is safe. If she gets control of $8.5 million in her current state, I am terrified she will give it away to scammers, or worse, use it to hurt herself." It was a brilliant performance. If I had not spent the last month tracing the $3.4 million she had stolen from our father company, I might have felt sorry for her. She spoke about my quiet apartment as if it were a prison. She described my lack of a public social media presence as evidence of severe paranoia. Every boundary I had ever set to protect myself from her toxicity was reframed as a symptom of mental illness. Then it was Marin's turn. My mother took the stand, clutching a crumbled tissue. Theron asked her if she agreed with Maeve's assessment of my mental health. Marin burst into tears. "It is true," she sobbed, looking at the judge. "My sweet girl is gone. She does not come to family dinners anymore. She thinks we are all plotting against her. Maeve has been an angel, trying to keep this family together, paying the bills, managing the company, and now trying to save her sister. Signing this petition was the hardest thing I have ever done, but it is the only way to save her." I watched my mother lie under oath. I watched her trade my freedom for the continued luxury of her country club lifestyle. There was no love in her tears, only the desperate fear of losing her mansion. Finally, Theron called Dr. Evander as an expert witness. The doctor strode up to the stand with an air of absolute authority. He wore a tailored suit and spoke in a deep, reassuring baritone. He testified about his 45-minute evaluation, citing his years of medical experience. Based on my professional assessment, Dr. Evander stated confidently, Sloane suffers from persistent delusional disorder. Her belief that her sister is embezzling funds is a classic manifestation of financial paranoia. She lacks the cognitive stability to manage daily life tasks, let alone a complex financial portfolio. Giving her access to sudden wealth would be catastrophic. Theron smiled, thanked the doctor, and turned to the judge. "The petitioner rests, Your Honor. The medical evidence is clear. The family testimony is unanimous. We ask that the guardianship be granted immediately for Sloane-owned protection." Maeve smirked at me from the petitioner table. It was a tiny, fleeting expression, a slight curling of her lip that only I could see. She was practically tasting the $8.5 million. She thought it was over. She thought she had won. Tamsin stood up slowly from our table, buttoning her suit jacket. She did not look flustered. She did not look intimidated. She looked bored. "Your Honor," Tamsin said, her voice cutting through the heavy silence of the courtroom like a blade. "Before I cross-examine these witnesses, I believe the court has received a sealed envelope containing verified employment and financial disclosures regarding my client. I ask that the court review the first document in that file." Judge Delphine frowned, adjusting her glasses. She picked up the thick manila envelope my employer had delivered, broke the red seal, and pulled out the top stack of papers. The courtroom was dead silent. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning vent above us. Maeve looked slightly confused, glancing at Theron. Theron just shrugged, assuming it was a desperate last-minute plea, perhaps some character references or an alternative psychological evaluation. They had no idea what was actually happening. Judge Delphine read the first page silently. Then she turned to the second page. Her eyebrows raised slightly. She spent 2 full minutes reading the documents, the silence stretching so long that Marin stopped her fake crying and shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Finally, the judge slowly lowered the papers. She took off her glasses, placed them on her desk, and looked directly at Maeve. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Judge Delphine leaned forward, resting her elbows on the heavy oak bench. She stared at Maeve with a look of intense, unyielding scrutiny. "Maeve," the judge said, her voice lacking any of the sympathy she had shown just moments before. "You testified under oath that your sister is incapable of holding down a steady job. You described her as a freelance bookkeeper who struggles with reality." Maeve swallowed hard, her confident posture faltering just a fraction. "Yes, Your Honor. She does minor bookkeeping tasks from her apartment. She cannot handle the stress of a real corporate environment." Judge Delphine turned her piercing gaze to me. "Sloane, please stand up." I pushed my chair back and stood tall, smoothing the front of my jacket. I looked the judge directly in the eye. The judge held up the document she had been reading. "Could you please state your full name, your employer, and your exact job title for the court record?" I took a slow, deep breath, letting the words resonate in the quiet room. "My name is Sloane. I am 29 years old. For the past 6 years, I have been employed by the Vanguard Corporate Intelligence Group. My official title is Senior Forensic Fraud Auditor." Theron dropped his pen. It clattered loudly against the wooden table. I continued, my voice steady and clear. My daily responsibilities involve tracing international money laundering, uncovering corporate embezzlement, and analyzing deeply hidden financial fraud for Fortune 500 companies. I hold advanced certifications in forensic accounting and digital asset tracking. The sealed file before you contains my security clearances, my performance reviews, and sworn affidavits from the managing directors of 3 different international banks, confirming my exceptional mental acuity and professional competence. Maeve's face went entirely slack. Her jaw quite literally dropped. She stared at me as if I had just grown a second head. Marin let out a confused, strangled gasp. Judge Delphine looked back at Maeve, who was now gripping the table as if the floor were moving beneath her. So, the judge noted dryly, the woman you claim is too mentally incompetent and paranoid to manage her own checking account is, in fact, trusted by international financial institutions to investigate multi-million-dollar fraud rings. Theron scrambled to his feet, his face flushed red. Your Honor, we were unaware of this specific job title. My client only knew she worked with spreadsheets. But a job title does not negate a medical diagnosis. High-functioning individuals can still suffer from severe paranoid delusions. The doctor testified that her belief about her sister stealing money is a delusion. Tamsin stepped out from behind our table, her eyes locked on Theron. Is it a delusion, counsel? Or is it an occupational hazard of being very, very good at her job? Tamsin turned to the judge. Your Honor, my client is not paranoid. She is observant. And the reason she suspected her sister of financial misconduct is because her sister is currently orchestrating one of the most sloppy, arrogant cases of corporate embezzlement I have ever seen in my 20 years of practicing law. Theron shouted an objection, claiming Tamsin was testifying and throwing wild, baseless accusations to distract from the medical evidence. Judge Delphine banged her gavel sharply, silencing the lawyer. I will allow it, the judge said sternly. Counsel, you better have something substantial to back up that claim. I have a mountain, Your Honor, Tamsin replied smoothly. But proving my sanity was not enough. I was not just there to defend myself and walk away. I was there to bury Maeve so deep she would never see the sun again. The plot twist was not just about my job, it was about what my job had allowed me to uncover. The court was about to see exactly what happens when you try to declare a fraud investigator mentally incompetent. Tamsin walked over to our table and picked up a thick stack of exhibit folders. She handed the first one to the court clerk to pass to the judge and dropped a copy directly in front of Theron. Let us address the so-called delusion that my client believes her sister is stealing, Tamsin began, her voice echoing in the silent room. Exhibit A is a sworn affidavit from Declan, the former chief financial officer of the family logistics company. Declan was fired by Maeve 3 months after she became CEO because he demanded documentation for massive, unverified wire transfers. Theron frantically flipped through the folder, his eyes darting across the pages. Tamsin continued. Exhibits B through D are the internal approval logs, signed by Maeve, authorizing the transfer of exactly $3.4 million to 3 consulting firms located in Austin, Texas. Exhibit E is the corporate registry data proving that all 3 of those firms are dummy corporations, shell entities owned entirely by Maeve. And Exhibit F is the bank routing history showing those exact funds being used to pay off Maeve personal debts from a failed tech startup, as well as the lease on the mother mansion. My client did not imagine a theft. She documented it. Maeve leaped out of her chair, her carefully crafted victim persona shattering into a million pieces. That is a lie, she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. She hacked those documents. She is trying to ruin me because she is jealous. Judge Delphine slammed her gavel. Sit down immediately, or I will hold you in contempt. The judge roared. Maeve collapsed back into her chair, her chest heaving, her face a mask of pure panic. Theron stood up, looking physically ill. Your Honor, I had no knowledge of these financial documents. My client assured me the family business was entirely secure. Tamsin did not give them a second to breathe. She moved on to the next target. Now, let us address the document that gives Maeve the legal standing to even request control of the trust. Exhibit G is the trust amendment submitted to the bank. Maeve claims her father signed this before he died. Tamsin handed a single sheet of paper to the clerk. It was the digital forensics report. We had the electronic file analyzed by a cybersecurity firm. The metadata embedded in the file proves this document was created on a computer in Austin exactly 96 days after the father's death. The signature is a digital clone, a copied and pasted image from an old vendor contract. It is a blatant, verifiable forgery. Theron slowly took his glasses off and placed them on the table. He moved a few inches away from Maeve, creating a physical distance between himself and his suddenly radioactive client. Marin was sobbing hysterically now, rocking back and forth in her chair, murmuring, "No, no, no, this is all a misunderstanding." "Is it a misunderstanding, Marin?" Tamsin asked sharply. "Your Honor, my client recorded a voicemail left by her mother just 2 weeks ago. I asked permission to play it for the court." Judge Delphine nodded curtly. "Play it." Tamsin connected a small speaker to her phone. The courtroom fell dead silent as my mother's voice filled the room. "Sloan, please, just let your sister handle the trust for a little while. Maeve just needs temporary control until the company audit is over. If you do not cooperate, the business could collapse, and the bank will take my house. Once the missing money is replaced, everything will go back to normal." The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was deafening. Marin covered her face with her hands, weeping loudly. She had admitted, on tape, that she knew the money was missing and that the guardianship was a scam to use my trust fund as collateral to cover up the embezzlement. She had sold me out for a house. Finally, Tamsin turned her gaze to Dr. Evander, who was still sitting in the witness box, looking as though he wanted to sink through the floorboards. "Dr. Evander," Tamsin said, her tone deceptively polite. "You testified that you diagnosed my client after a careful medical evaluation. You swore under oath that your medical opinion was unbiased." "Yes," the doctor croaked, his confident baritone reduced to a raspy whisper. Tamsin handed the final folder to the judge. Exhibit H is a wire transfer receipt. It shows a payment of exactly $45,000 sent from one of Maeve Dummy Corporations directly into a Delaware LLC owned by Dr. Evander. This payment was sent 3 days before the so-called medical evaluation even took place. Dr. Evander was not acting as a physician. He was acting as a paid assassin, hired to fabricate a medical diagnosis to facilitate the theft of $8.5 million. My mother wept, but this time, there were no tissues. Judge Delphine gavel came down, but the real punishment was waiting outside the courtroom doors. Judge Delphine did not even bother calling for a recess to deliberate. The fury radiating from the bench was palpable. She looked at Maeve, then at Marin, and finally at Dr. Evander with a level of disgust I had never seen on a human face. "The petition for guardianship is denied with extreme prejudice," Judge Delphine announced, her voice ringing out like a bell tolling the end of an era. "The temporary freeze on the respondent trust is lifted immediately. Furthermore, based on the evidence presented in this courtroom today, I am ordering a full transcript of these proceedings, along with all submitted exhibits, to be forwarded directly to the State Medical Licensing Board, the District Attorney Office, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Theron stood up, looking pale and deeply shaken. "Your Honor," he stammered, "I formally request to withdraw as counsel for the petitioner, effective immediately. The information presented today creates an irreconcilable ethical conflict." "Request granted," Judge Delphine snapped. "We are adjourned." The judge stood and swept out of the room. The moment the door closed behind her, the heavy silence in the courtroom shattered. Maeve jumped up, her face twisted in a mask of ugly, desperate rage. She lunged toward me, her hands reaching out like claws. "You ruined everything!" Maeve screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You selfish, ungrateful bitch. I was trying to save the company. Dad built that company, and you just destroyed it to spite me." A court bailiff immediately stepped in, grabbing Maeve by the arm and shoving her back. "Step away from the respondent, ma'am," the bailiff warned, his hand resting on his utility belt. I stood there, perfectly calm, buttoning my suit jacket. I looked at the woman who had tormented me for my entire life, the golden child who was now reduced to a screaming, desperate criminal. I did not destroy anything, Maeve, I said, my voice low and steady. You gambled away millions of dollars on your own vanity. You stole from our father legacy, and then you tried to erase my entire existence, my freedom, and my sanity just to cover your tracks. You thought I was a weak, invisible target. I am just the person who turned the lights on so everyone could see what you did in the dark. Marin stumbled over to us, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face, her expensive gray suit wrinkled. Sloane, please, she begged, grabbing my arm. We are family. We can fix this. You have to tell them not to investigate. You have your money now. Please, do not send your sister to jail. I looked at my mother, hand gripping my sleeve. I felt nothing. No warmth, no loyalty, no lingering desperate desire for her approval. The mother I had wanted did not exist. The woman standing in front of me was just a stranger who loved money more than her own child. I slowly pulled my arm away. You knew exactly what she was doing, Marin. You knew she was trying to lock me in a legal cage for the rest of my life, and you helped her do it so you could keep your house. Do not ever call me your family again. I turned and walked toward the heavy wooden double doors of the courtroom, Tamsin right beside me. When I pushed the doors open and stepped into the hallway, a wave of profound relief washed over me. But the justice was not finished yet. Waiting in the wide, marble hallway were 3 men wearing dark suits. One of them held up a badge. He was an agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation White-Collar Crime Division. Apparently, Declan had not just come to me. He had quietly filed a whistleblower report months ago, and the FBI had been building a case in the background. My evidence presented in court today was just the final nail they needed to secure the arrest warrants. Maeve stumbled out of the courtroom a few seconds behind me, still crying and arguing with Marin. The federal agents stepped forward, blocking her path. Maeve, the lead agent said, his voice clipped and professional. You are under arrest for wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and forgery. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Maeve froze. The blood drained entirely from her face. She looked at the handcuffs, then looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. She started shaking her head violently. No, this is a family matter. It is a business loan. Marin, do something. Call Theron. Theron walked past them without making eye contact, rushing toward the elevators. Marin stood frozen against the wall, her hands covering her mouth, watching as the federal agent forcefully turned her golden child around and locked the steel cuffs around her wrists. The click of the metal echoing in the hallway was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Watching her being led away, shuffling toward the elevators in handcuffs, I did not feel joy. I did not feel the triumphant vindication you see in the movies. I felt exhausted. But beneath the exhaustion, I felt the profound, heavy peace of a ghost who had finally been given back her voice. I was no longer the invisible daughter. I was free. The fallout from that day in court was swift and merciless. When the justice system finally catches up to people who believe they are untouchable, it operates with a crushing efficiency. Because of the overwhelming mountain of digital evidence, the forged trust documents, and the detailed banking records, Maeve's legal defense collapsed almost immediately. She tried to claim she was suffering from immense stress and made poor business choices, but the prosecutor was ruthless. The evidence showed calculated, malicious intent to steal millions from the corporate shareholders and an evil plot to falsely imprison her own sister in a guardianship to cover it up. Facing decades in prison if she took it to trial, Maeve accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to multiple counts of federal wire fraud and forgery. The judge sentenced her to 12 years in federal prison. She was ordered to pay full restitution, meaning every single asset she owned, the luxury cars, the designer jewelry, the hidden bank accounts, was seized and liquidated by the government. She went from being the glamorous CEO on the cover of local magazines to inmate number locked in a concrete cell. Dr. Evander Fate was equally satisfying. The state medical board revoked his license to practice medicine permanently. The district attorney charged him with perjury, fraud, and accepting bribes. He lost his practice, his reputation, and avoided prison time only by cooperating and paying a massive, ruinous fine that bankrupted him. He will never be allowed to evaluate another human being for the rest of his life. As for Marin, she did not escape the wreckage. Because she had actively participated in the conspiracy by signing a false affidavit and providing false testimony under oath, she was charged with perjury and conspiracy. She avoided a prison sentence due to her age and lack of criminal history, but the judge showed her no mercy. She was sentenced to 6 months of strict house arrest followed by 3 years of probation. But the real punishment for Marin was the financial ruin. With Maeve in prison and the logistics company seized by a court-appointed receiver to manage the debts, the stolen funds used to pay for Marin's lifestyle evaporated. The bank foreclosed on her massive mansion. She was forced to sell all her expensive furniture and move into a small, rented apartment on the edge of town. 2 weeks after the trial, on my 30th birthday, the bank released the trust. I logged into my secure portal and watched the balance update. $8.5 million. It was real. It was mine. I did not quit my job. I love what I do. I love hunting down financial predators. But I did change how I lived. I bought a beautiful, secure home with a massive garden. I traveled. I breathed easily for the first time in my entire adult life. But I knew I could not just sit on that money while other people were being destroyed by the same broken system Maeve had tried to use against me. So, I took a significant portion of my inheritance and founded the Sloan Financial Autonomy Project. It is a legal aid foundation dedicated specifically to helping victims of family financial abuse. We provide free forensic accounting services and aggressive legal representation for vulnerable people whose families are trying to use fake mental health diagnoses, fraudulent guardianships, and forged documents to steal their assets. We fight for the elderly, the invisible children, and the victims who have been told they are crazy when they are actually just standing in the way of a greedy relative. My mother still sends me letters. Once a month, a thin envelope arrives at my office. She writes pages and pages begging for forgiveness, claiming she was just manipulated by Maeve, that she was scared and confused, and that a mother and daughter should never be estranged. She says she loves me and wants to be a family again. I return every single letter unopened. I have learned a very hard truth over the past few years. Forgiveness is a beautiful concept, but it is not a requirement for healing. You do not owe a relationship to the people who tried to destroy you, even if they share your DNA. My mother did not just make a mistake, she made a calculated choice to sacrifice my life to preserve her comfort. Removing toxic people from your life is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of profound self-respect. Do not ever let anyone use your past trauma, your grief, or your mental health struggles as proof that you are weak or unfit. The people who loudly claim they are trying to protect you are sometimes the exact people holding the shovel to bury you. If something feels wrong, if the numbers do not add up, trust your instincts. Keep records. Fight back. And never let anyone convince you that you are crazy just because you refuse to close your eyes to their lies. My mother still sends me letters begging for forgiveness, saying she was just manipulated by Maeve. I return them unopened. Am I wrong for refusing to forgive the woman who gave me life when she was willing to take it away? Tell me in the comments. And if you believe in fighting back, hit subscribe to join our community.